Okay, so it is now the top of the hour, and we will be starting in just a minute. We're going to give people a couple minutes to log on because we know it's lunchtime and people are getting situated. So we are glad to be here, glad to have our special guest, Michelle Gilbert. And I will just put in a disclaimer that this is summertime in Chicago. So from time to time during the course of the presentation, you might hear they're practicing for the air and water show this weekend. So you might hear planes going over, but that's one of those things. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us. We will wait maybe just a couple minutes to allow people to log on. So while we do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about some of our upcoming programming. We have the return of our property management book club series restarting next week. So the next book that we're going to cover, we cover it for three weeks, and this is a virtual book club. The title of the book is Real Estate 100, The Team and Millennial Experience. So basically, we are having conversations about what is it like for younger people to start to understand what it's like to learn about real estate and how it works and how to invest in real estate. So we definitely invite you to join us. Following that, so that's again meeting for 3 weeks. And then starting in September, we're going to start reading a book called The South Side, a portrait of Chicago and American segregation. That is by Chicago's own WBEZ reporter Natalie Moore. And she talks about her experiences growing up in Chicago, particularly in the Chatham neighborhood. And she also talks about housing and its effects on the development of South Side neighborhoods. So we hope you can join us. I'll show you a QR code to access our website, which is www.cicchicago.com. So I'm looking at it. We're 2 minutes past the hour, so let's go ahead and get started in the interest of time. And let me share my screen to show you what we're doing today. So here we go. Great. Okay, so we are here to talk about how to help tenants avoid eviction. And our audience is for owners and managers of buildings, and we're looking for to provide information to help people to know how to pass on that information about resources. This is sponsored by Community Investment Corporation, and we're a mission-driven lender in Chicago. And we're very happy to be joined by Michelle Gilbert, who is the Legal and Policy Director with the Law Center for Better Housing. So welcome to Michelle. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about us and what we do. As I mentioned, we are Community Investment Corporation. We are a mission-driven lender that's been active in Chicago since 1974. So we are very excited to be celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. So that's really cool. And basically, we loan to people who are interested in the preservation of affordable housing, and that is our specialty. What I do with the organization is I'm in charge of our property management training program. So, in addition to loaning funds to developers to strengthen neighborhoods and provide affordable housing, we also want to contribute to the success of those developers and owners. So, we offer property management training to talk about things like budgeting, maintenance, tenant screening, pet policies, and a variety of things. So if you want to scan our QR code there, it'll take you to our website and you can join us for one of our upcoming trainings. We have one coming up on September 9th. And we also offer virtual training and a calendar of additional program that we invite you to take part of. And we also invite you to join our mailing list. Again, our website is www.cicchicago.com. And that is me. I'm the training and technical assistance manager who heads up that property management training program. So without further ado, again, that's our QR code, that's our website. That is how you can find our programming. And without further ado, let me go back, stop sharing my screen, and ask Michelle to take over and share some information about the resources. Thank you for joining us, Michelle.
Yes, Erica, thank you very much for inviting us. As Erica said, I'm the Legal and Policy Director for Law Center for Better Housing. The Law Center has been around for 40 years, not quite as long as CIC, and we exclusively represent tenants and in a variety of legal issues, but primarily, especially since the pandemic, in eviction defense. I've been a legal aid attorney for 34 years, which is feels as long as it sounds, and mostly have focused on housing, although I've done a variety of things. And really preventing people from being evicted has been really more than a career goal, but a life goal. So I'm really happy to take some of the information that I share with tenants and community groups and share it with this new audience. Because I think, as you will see as I go through the slides, I think we have a common purpose here. Of course, I know I'm talking to, it's like I'm preaching to the choir. Appreciate people who come in for a program like this, but hopefully that will get them message out to more landlords. Just to be clear, if I answer any questions, it's going to be about Chicago, maybe Cook County or Illinois law, and landlord tenant law is very specific. So we primarily represent people in Chicago, so that's the thing that I know. Also, I'm going to give some information. A lot of it isn't even like truly legal information, but I can't actually give any legal advice on any specific situation. The good thing is I'm going to have a resource that people can use, that landlords can use to get specific legal advice. Okay, so with those kind of starting caveats, let's go. For people who are interested in eviction, one of the things that LCBH does, in addition to working on policy or direct services, is that we collected a decade of eviction data from 2009 to 2019, and prepared reports about it. The data is there. It looks at evictions by ward and community area, and just it's a place to go play around if you have want to look at what eviction looks like in Chicago. One of the reasons I start with this, in addition to the fact that we just need more information about eviction so that we make good policy decisions, is that it shows what we probably would have guessed even without the data, which I know from actually being on the floor of the Daily Center, that eviction is an issue that largely impacts people of color, and actually particularly Black women. You can see here from the darker shading those community areas that witness the highest rate of eviction. So not only is that kind of interesting from a statistical point of view, it's very much what motivates our office and me personally about making eviction a priority. We think that working in the eviction area is fair housing, and we think that it's part of our job for striving towards racial justice. So that's kind of a theme of our work, and I like to just put it out there. And I should say, I have several slides, which I've already sent to Erica and said that I'm very happy for them to be shared because I've put a bunch of links in them. And I'm going to get through some of the material, and that which is not going to take us anywhere near the time allotted for the program. And then I'm happy to dialogue or answer any questions. So this is that I have in many presentations when I'm talking to people, because a lot of people don't really think about the problems that eviction causes. Eviction is something that happens to other people. And I think that's one of the reasons why there really was a lot more attention to eviction during the pandemic, because it looked like it could affect us. It could happen to people like my son's friends who had recently graduated from college and weren't that secure in their positions when the pandemic started in 2020. And even though I have been out talking about evictions for 30 years, I think a lot of people had not been giving them much attention. One thing that we know is that eviction is not only caused by people having low incomes or by job loss or something, it actually makes their economic situation even worse. The eviction, I can't stress enough that eviction isn't a problem that just happens to some other people. I mean, not only could it happen to one of our kids, but even if it's not our kid, these are all of our children, right? It disrupts their schooling. It forces people to move in a way that is not the way when I go talk to law firms or something, I say, imagine how you plan to move when you think about it in advance and you think about your children's schooling, and that's not happen. What happens to my clients when they get evicted? I think the point here, and this certainly during the pandemic helped grow my thinking on this issue, is that it's not just the tenants who are hurt by an eviction. An eviction itself is a lose-lose situation. Yes, the landlord has secured moving out someone who won't pay or hasn't been paying or is unable to pay, that someone moves out, but what do you have there? An empty apartment. Um, landlords want people in their apartments. Um, and maybe it's a money judgment, but that's not actually money. And I've had judgments against people as well that I haven't been able to collect. So that's a very nice piece of paper, but it doesn't actually help you. And that's why I think rental assistance was so important during the pandemic with the eviction moratorium. And this is just a little data point. It doesn't begin to encompass how much money was spent on rental assistance, but just in 22 and 23, just the Illinois Housing Development Authority, and that's not any of the other funding sources, spent $200 million on rental assistance. And that's money, and almost all of it, other than a slight percentage, which I can talk about if you want, all of that is in checks to landlords. So although it's a benefit to the tenant, it's a benefit to both sides, really. And that's money that gets back into the community. I know when I'm seeing a landlord getting a check for $15,000, that's somebody who's going to be able to pay their mortgage, be able to go to Home Depot and buy stuff that's needed for the building. So when I have talked with members of the General Assembly, the administration about rental assistance, I really stress that it is community economic development because it's getting money back into the community that otherwise, pardon me, would be lost. So how about some specifics on money is available? So the first possibility is something called the State Homeless Prevention Program. And in Chicago, people can access it by calling 311 or 211 and asking for short-term help for housing. It actually doesn't have an income cap. It's really meant for those situations where someone has suffered an emergency, like they've lost their job, but they're getting unemployment. It's coming, but there's that period in the middle. Or a lot of my clients do not have paid leave from work. So they miss time at work, and so they're not going to get a check, so they can't pay their rent. And it will pay up to an amount equal to 6 months of rent. It also can be used for mortgage payments. It can be used for security deposits for people who are moving, can be used for utility bills. The total amount is going to be equal to 6 months of rent. And that's a program that requires landlord and tenant participation. A landlord can give the information to the tenant can call in, ask to be part of the process, and then some information is gathered. Some forms have to be signed, of course, because it's government money, and then the check is sent to the landlord. And that can be used either if there's an eviction case on file, or really important, it can be used before an eviction is filed. So that can be started with a 5-day notice. And that is funding that exists throughout the state of Illinois. I'm assuming mostly we're talking about Chicago here, but it is a program. So another alternative is that Center for Conflict Resolution provides free mediation, and they're not judges. Actually, they're often volunteers. Another, of course, post-COVID, they can be done on Zoom, so people don't even have to leave their home. They can be done before a landlord thinks about filing a case. I have heard, like, I go to a number of events with like the Building Owners Association. I hear that landlords don't want to file evictions. They know that the only person who, I don't know if you can see me, I'm making those little quotes. The only people who win in eviction cases are the lawyers, and they say, oh, I wish that my tenant would talk to me about their situation. I wish that we could try to work it out. And this is a way when it can be about rent, but it can be about other things as well. I think this is especially good where there's some relationship, or where you've really got a smaller, maybe even owner occupied, but where there's a lot of interaction between the landlord and the. I want to make clear though that you don't have to do mediation. Definitely think about repayment agreements. And I know that it's hard to take that first step after if somebody's behind, but if you're thinking about it not as what do I need to do to get the case into court, as much as what do I need to do to make sure that I'm getting paid? Because again, if you do a repayment agreement, you're not paying the filing fee, the attorney fee, you're not dealing with tension, and it's worth a shot. Now, I put this in here because I want to point out that the repayment agreement really should be in writing. And you're thinking like, well, of course a lawyer is going to say that, but it doesn't have to be some super contract that you have to pay a lawyer to come out with. It's just figuring out how much is owed and then how much is due. The link here is a link to, I think it is a PDF document that you can fill out, but this link here is a link to this document. I do emphasize it should be in writing because it gets really confusing when people, if it does need to get to court. Also, I mean, we advise our clients, we share with this link, give them some strategies about approaching their landlord. But if the landlord's unwilling to put it in writing, then I'm concerned about the tenant starting to pay, because they can pay and unless they can pay off the full amount completely, they can still end up in court. So I do encourage that it be in writing. Also, we know how the large corporate landlords work. They're about adding the fees on and on. And I'm just going to call out First Key Homes because they shock me and how much fees they add on. And then sometimes people even get into a situation that's more expensive than they thought it was because not all the fees were disclosed. But good to get repaid right away. But probably better to work out an agreement that really both of you can live with, and that the tenant can make sure that they're making the payments. And then my fourth alternative, now when Erica and I talked about scheduling this, I thought that this would all be back up and operating, and it's not back yet. So I use that italics there. I don't know exactly what's going to be happening. I do know though that the General Assembly put in the budget and the governor approved $75 million in court-based rental assistance, general revenue funds. So all the money that was used before was federal funding, but policymakers believe this was a good alternative. It got money into communities. It prevented eviction. This to me is your win-win situation. So $75 million, it is expected to be back. They keep saying after Labor Day. So I'm really hoping like a September or 9 or something like that. They haven't committed specifically. They got to spend $75 million before next June. So it's got to be coming back pretty soon. Um,
Michelle, can I ask you a question real
oh
quick? Or
yeah, oh sorry, I didn't see your hand there.
that's quite all right. Just to mention that as you and I discussed, it's still helpful, even though the funds are not available right now. It's still helpful to our audience to know of the possibility of the return. And also, you and I talked about the fact that there are a lot of property owners who have no idea that these resources ever really existed. So we want to take the time to make people aware to watch out for them just in case.
Yeah, definitely. This is the link. It says right now coming back, but you can visit this link and it will see when they get their materials out. And Ida is very good about getting out materials, and I can definitely, if I get uh uh announcement about it, I can share it with Erica. We can spread it out on our network. Now, the one I will acknowledge that the one problem, or not problem, but the one thing that I wish was slightly different is this does require that a court case be filed because it's court-based rental assistance. And I think the next generation has to be getting more money into pre-court. But people can apply as soon as there's that court number. Legal aid will help tenants. The systems that we've created in the Cook County courts will help people, give them information about the court-based rental assistance. And so I really do encourage people to look into this. And one point here in Chicago and Cook County that there can be, so it mostly is based on landlord and tenant agreeing and working on the case together, working on that application together. And that's what happens in most cases. But it does, in Cook County, only have a path where the tenant can apply on their own so that they can give effect to their one-time right to cure or pay to stay that's in the Chicago and Cook County ordinances. So again, in this thing about dialogue and how I think that this audience and our audience are on the same side here. We want to keep these properties locally owned because, again, the corporate owners, in addition to charging all the additional fees, just don't tend to the neighborhood and to the property like somebody who's truly committed to that neighborhood. So it's a 5-part project that Injustice Watch did. I just would encourage you. It's just truly right out yesterday. So it's something that I wanted to share. I didn't put it first. I wanted to hopefully you would start liking me before I talked about conditions. But I mean, we know that there are landlords who don't take care of their property like it is a long-term investment. And 40 something percent of our, like 43% of our clients identify conditions with the property as one of the reasons why they got behind in rent. So I just encourage you to look at that and again, see how what we have in common, our two organizations, as opposed to the large corporate landlords.
Michelle, if I could just say that in a lot of cases, the landlords that you're talking about who are, the corporate entities and the slumlords and the people who are not taking care, who actually make it harder for the landlords who are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to, they give such a bad reputation that it creates like that, sometimes that antagonistic relationship just on the factor that this person wears the label of landlord. So then I'm going to assign all of these bad impressions that I've gotten from other places. So yeah, the
Yeah,
people
no,
who are trying to do it right are the ones who are watching webinars like this and trying
yeah,
to
no, exactly. I mean, I see us as being in a similar place. I mean, we want to keep locally owned units
Mhm.
because you've got that investment in the community. So I'm gonna just highlight a couple of other resources. If you'll have to get to that point of filing eviction, there have been changes in the courts. and additional resources, a combination of the Cook County government, Chicago Bar Foundation, the courts, local legal aid organizations, created the Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt, which addresses evictions, consumer debt, and tax deed issues, helps connect people to attorneys, to rental assistance, and to the mediation I spoke about. Unique among all of these programs in the country is that CLAD provides legal aid to landlords who can't afford an attorney. So how do people access this? If a landlord files a lawsuit and they just go to court, the court coordinator will see, oh, you're unrepresented. Do you want to talk to an ERP, an early resolution program attorney? And that consultation is free. I say can't afford an attorney. There actually isn't an income calculation and there isn't a citizenship calculation. It's really open to anyone who needs some advice. But people can also call that CLAD hotline number that I had in the last slide to ask some questions about alternatives, get the information about mediation, rental assistance, or other information. And it's different legal aid programs. So something called Chicago Volunteer Legal Services, that's what CVLS stands for. They're the people who give advice to the self-represented landlords. And here, just to look at it in a different way, this advice is known as pre-filing, as advice for when people are trying to file a case, or in preliminary hearings. CVLS has some information like what I've been talking about. There's a video on this link, as well as a checklist, some other information. There are now state court forms, including not just the court forms, forms for agreements, and forms for notices of termination. So folks should not feel like they have to go buy one or create their own. They can just pull it down from this website and be assured of getting a proper form. Another really good resource is illinoislegalaid.org, and that's available to anyone. It's not just for legal aid attorneys, but anyone can go in and, how do I file this? How do I, the repayment agreement that I showed earlier, advice on using that agreement and pulling up the actual document, you can find on Illinois Legal Aid. So I'm going to stop sharing and then see if anyone has questions, or I see two things in the chat, or other things that people just want to talk about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that great information, Michelle. Yeah, from the chat, Daniel asked, will the slides be made available? And yes, as you mentioned, they will be available. The links will be included. So that'll take you to this valuable information that Michelle shared. There's another question. I understand there's a new version of the 5-day notice. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, what you really have is a committee from the Illinois Supreme Court. It's called the Illinois Access to Justice Commission that came up with these standards that they're not, some of the orders are actually required. That notice form isn't required that you use that form, but A, it's free, and B, you know that you're using the right form. So we definitely see people who, in trying to draft their own form, like looking at the statute or whatever, don't use the proper form. So it is an idea that partly the goal is to be written in plain language. A bunch of lawyers worked on it though. So well, I'm sure that the boss actually is part of the commission. I'm sure that they did work on it to make it accessible to people. And the same goal with the court forms.
That's very helpful. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention from watching your presentation, which I mean, I admit I learned a lot from it. And even though I float around in the space, there was a lot of new information that you provided. One is, I'm really glad that you included the note about what types of landlords generally tend to use mediation. You said they tend to be places where there's more like a relationship or an interaction between the property owner and the resident, and they know each other and there's some kind of common ground. So that it's helpful to know the cases where, it might be good to take that route. So thank you for talking about that. And then you also, when you mentioned legal aid, I'm glad that you brought that up just as a resource for property owners to use, but also to kind of remind ourselves that people get the picture of landlords and property owners as being these big corporate entities and with deep pockets and all these resources. But there can be situations where there are people who own property who are in not much of a different economic situation from the people who rent units in their buildings, and just having that understanding that this range of people who are in the field to try to provide affordable housing is a good reminder. So good to know that resources exist. There tend to be a lot of resources for residents in Chicago and the surrounding areas. So it's very good to know that there are also resources to assist those smaller independent landlords. So thank you.
Information about the two big rental assistance programs. Because, I mean, the court-based one is $75 million. That's something, that's not pocket change. That's an amount of money we're talking about. There are also smaller programs. If you have a tenant, like if someone, especially if it's not at that point where they need that much money, social workers are able to help connect people, maybe to a smaller fund, or faith-based organizations often have like a smaller fund. And it's why I try to encourage our tenants when I'm speaking with them to try to talk to the landlord. Like, I get why it's hard. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I grew up in a family with a very modest income. I
Mm-hmm.
knew that my mom and dad were in the other room saying, okay, well, we can pay this bill this month, but we're
Yeah.
going to put this one in the drawer for this month, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to get by. And so I can see that kind of embarrassment or whatever that a tenant might have in initiating that conversation.
Sure.
But I think both sides trying to get that communication working. That's why the mediation is great, or trying to put in writing the repayment agreement is working towards the common goal
Mm-hmm.
of keeping money in the unit, keeping the tenant in the unit,
Mm-hmm.
keeping money coming into the landlord.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, like about housing instability is something that it can be one of the biggest things to affect a family because sometimes it's something as small as like a medical bill, unexpected medical
Mhm.
bill, or you have a vehicle that now it needs a lot of funds to keep it running, and you need the vehicle to do everything. So everything is connected, and if your housing is unstable, then it really just affects everything for a family, and it's not that hard for something like that to happen. So I appreciate you providing that perspective to remind us to try to be willing to work with those situations. And this is something I don't, excuse me, I don't want to put you on the spot because we didn't talk about this in advance, but
Yeah,
just a question. So a lot of people have the perception that all of these rental assistance programs and all these funds started flowing as a result of the pandemic. But is it true? And I think you talked a little bit about it. Is it true that some forms of these programs even existed prior to that time under like homelessness prevention
yes, the
initiatives?
homeless prevention fund has been in place. I'm sure it's at least 15 years because I'm
Wow.
thinking about where my office was, the different office moves. So that's been in place. It's sort of slowly grown. Just really this acknowledgement. And this is one of the things that actually you can see in the eviction data portal as well. Prior to the pandemic, people were being evicted for pretty small amounts of rent. I
Mm.
have represented subsidized tenants for much of my career. And those folks are getting evicted for very small amounts of rent. But even the private market tenants are being evicted for being a couple $1,000s behind. I mean,
Wow.
how much better to make that money available? Landlord gets the money, the tenant gets not evicted, the landlord keeps their unit occupied, the tenant doesn't lose their possessions, they don't have to disrupt their kids' education. I mean, it's just such an obvious tension. I mean, and I think that it got a lot, like 75 million, like the kind of dollars that
Yeah.
came during the pandemic is really, I think, I want to say, I could be wrong. I want to say that state homeless prevention is about 16 million.
Which is not, there's nothing to sneeze at.
Exactly. And there's data that shows that when that money flows into, when it actually works, it prevents an eviction, like
Yeah.
very high percentage. And that it's like the difference between thinking again about the pandemic. Like, we don't know how many people did not get COVID because they wore a mask or because they socially distanced,
Mhm.
what was prevented? That's the same thing like with the homeless prevention funds. I mean, those people don't become the statistics in shelters. Those are
Mhm.
the people who didn't get the terrible outcome. It is among my goals to continue to work to advocate for more money for that fund as well. Because, like I said, that can be done pre-court, where the court base does require a filing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because that reminded me. I was also glad to learn from you the distinction between pre-court and court-based um, assistance. So, yeah, it's really good to understand all the processes and how the pieces fit together and everything. So, thank you for that. We have in the chat, it says, so yeah, the link the presentation and the links will be shared, so you'll have access to that information. And then one person says, I just got rental assistance from the Urban League here in the St. Louis area. Oh, great, wonderful. So we have someone joining us from St. Louis. We're here in Chicago. So welcome to you. And it's good to know that those funds were available, and I hope that they were helpful in providing that stability for your family. So thank you for sharing that. Great. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Michelle, is there anything that we forgot to talk about that you would like to cover?
Well, you never want to give a lawyer an open window.
You might learn something though.
I'm always happy to come back. That Lunch and Learn that you're having, the book club with Natalie Moore, or Natalie Moore's book sounds very
Yes,
interesting. Um,
great. We'd love to have you, Michelle.
well, I'm very glad for this opportunity, and glad that it came up. So let me know. And like I said, I will make sure to send you when I get that information from Ida so that we can be sharing it out to everyone.
That is great. So yeah, and the book club that you mentioned. So for those of you who joined us a little bit later in the program, I'm about to post a slide that'll take you to our website. So you'll find out about, we're reading about a book about the development of neighborhoods in Chicago and how they've been impacted by housing decisions. And it's written by a local, one of our radio reporters, Natalie Moore, and she talks about specifically growing up in the Chatham neighborhood. So we hope people will join us. Hold on 1 minute. Let me just share the screen so you can see how to get to that information. So again, this is our QR code to access our property management training site. And our website is www.cicchicago. We offer both in-person and virtual property management training. And this webinar was a part of our series. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Michelle for the great information. And I'm still not seeing any additional questions. So we will be happy to give you back the rest of your lunchtime. And thank you, Michelle. Thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good
All
day, everyone.
all right. Have a great day. We'll end it there. Take care.